Hi, I'm John Redman, and you're watching The Red Booth Show.
Hi, I'm Kimberly, and welcome to The Red Booth Show. Happy 4th of July, everybody. I am here with John Redman.
And today we're going to talk about drug policy. So happy Independence Day.
That's right. Check it out. So here we are with Mr. John Redman. How are you today?
I'm excellent, thank you.
I feel very honored to have you here with me because you're not the typical kind of guest that I have. Every now and then I have a very interesting cause or political topic, and this is definitely one of them, I think, because of what it is that you do.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and I think it's a little interesting myself, which is why I do it.
Why don't you give everybody sort of an idea about what it is that your job entails, basically?
Yeah, I'm the Director of Demand Reduction for the HIDTAs, which is the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas. It's a program out of ONDCP, which is the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and I deal with demand reduction. The HIDTAs deal with supply and demand reduction. I deal with the demand side of it for the 4 HIDTAs of California.
Wow. So you're mainly based in California, but you obviously probably deal with things on a federal level as well, right?
I'm mainly in California. I help out other states as they ask me to, mostly the western states, and I do go to the East Coast from time to time as well.
Well, very cool.
Yeah.
So we wanted to have you here today, or I wanted to have you here today because there is a new bill that is coming up in the end of the year about legalizing marijuana here in California.
Right.
Now we already know that it's already here pretty abundantly in terms of the medical use, but the legalization is, I think, a topic that I started bringing up on my social media, and I realized it's very mixed up with the idea of medical use and that sort of thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's rather confusing. You know, we do have medical use marijuana, and we have had it since 1996 here in California. Right now, there's an initiative that may be on the ballot. They're gathering signatures as we speak for what they call recreational use.
Right. So this would mean that everything, it would be like basically like buying alcohol. It would be available in stores and
Right.
all over the place, and that it would include not just your typical, bowl or whatever, but the edibles that I think is a problem that we've been seeing from Colorado, which is why I thought it'd be really interesting to have John here because he's got a lot of information about how that has been playing out in other states.
Right. In 2012, Washington State and Colorado legalized marijuana for recreational use. They were the first 2 states to do so. In 2014, they were followed by Alaska and Oregon. That's for full recreational use. And most people, I'm not sure that they fully understand it or understand how that will be realized. And in Colorado, it's fraught with some problems.
Like what? Can you give us some examples?
Well, when people usually look at this policy issue of legalization, it's usually because of a pushback on what they consider the war on drugs, something that, during the Nixon administration, they consider it the war on drugs kind of a war on its own people, and so it's been a pushback to, from a criminal justice point of view.
Right, because people don't like, obviously, the idea of somebody getting caught with some marijuana and going to prison for a bunch of years, it seems a little bit extreme, right?
Right, but yet there's not a lot like that's happening. In other words, if you take a look at California since, 1972, I think it was Senate Bill 90 that said that if you have an ounce or less, it's pretty much a traffic ticket, $100 fine. So that's what we have currently, and I don't know much about the bill as it's coming up because I'm not here to really talk specifically about that. But what we're looking at is, are we going to commercialize it? Because I think the initiative says for an ounce or less, it's not a big deal, but we already have that. Just like Prop 215 also said under an ounce is for medicinal purposes. Plus, whatever your doctor said that he would recommend you have at a given time. But that was just laid out there. It was based off of what a doctor would say. So there weren't real regulations put on it. And I think that's been kind of a frustration with Californians. Maybe we should go full legalization and commercialize it. We could regulate it, control it, and keep it out of the hands of youth. That hasn't happened in Colorado. I doubt it will happen here in California as well.
All right, well, on that note, we have to take a quick break.
Sure.
And we'll be right back with Mr. John Redman.
I really wanted to put a deck on my house.
The floor was creaking and there were cracks in the wall.
I had them put in walls in my basement.
Well, the whole thing was done on time, on budget, and not a day of work was missed.
Alpha Structural is a top-rate company. I'd recommend them to anybody.
If you live in a hillside home and gravity is pulling you towards the edge of the cliff, I recommend you call Alpha.
It was a real pleasure to work with Alpha.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it,
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got, or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
And welcome back to the Red Booth Show. I'm here with Mr. John Redman. How's it going, Mr. Redman?
Excellent, thank you.
Yes. Now, you were just talking about California and Colorado and the legalization of marijuana in Colorado.
Right.
And I think one of the points about it not getting into the hands of youth, I mean, obviously we know in California that there's a lot of youth that do smoke pot illegally or whatever.
Sure.
But what will be the difference, and what do you think, based on the example in Colorado, of it be legalized here, fully legalized?
Yeah, the concept, when people start to look at legalizing marijuana, when they talk about youth, they say if we legalize it, we can regulate it, control it, keep it out of the hands of youth. To me, that's kind of a bizarre statement when we take a look at what the top drugs of abuse are in youth in California already, which are alcohol and tobacco, the legal drugs. Marijuana is a distant third or fourth. So when we take a look at that and see that policy-wise, the legal drugs are the top drugs of abuse. Why is that? Well, it's because they're legal, therefore they're available. You can get them on every street corner or your parents' liquor cabinet, 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
And so once that availability increases, it's very difficult to then control it within a community and keep it out of the hands of youth. How can kids say no to drugs when the adults around them are saying yes? It's very difficult. So availability is one of the key factors in youth use. If there's going to be more of a drug in a community, then youth use is going to increase. And that's what we've seen in Colorado. Currently, Colorado has the #1 state for marijuana use in youth.
Right.
There's no other state that's ahead of them in that. And that's because they've legalized it. They have more.
Right, because it's like, it's okay, so why not, right?
Yeah, well,
Everybody thinks it's no big deal.
And it's available. It's everywhere. It's on,
Yeah.
They have a number of marijuana stores all over. So you increase that availability, you increase
For
marijuana
everyone.
within a community, it's going to be there.
Yeah.
And so more availability is increased to not only adult use but also youth use. That's what happened in Colorado. That's what's happened in Washington State as well.
Now, one of the interesting things I had found out about, which was one of the reasons I thought it would be interesting to have you talk about this, was that the youth in Colorado had a major decrease in terms of education of children, I guess, flunking out or something like that in high school, and it seemed to increase after this. Did you have information on that?
Well, the issue was there's an increase in expulsions from school.
Expulsion, so being kicked out of school.
Being kicked out of school for drug use, and marijuana being the majority of that for high school kids.
Now, I have teenagers, actually, who are in middle school and now in high school, and ones have graduated. And I experienced, even right now, which it's not legalized here, that my kids in middle school would still smell pot on campus. So it's not like it's already sort of a problem, but it seems like this is going to make it a lot more abundant.
Sure. There's going to be, as availability increases, the perceived harm of that drug in youth are going to decrease because they're going to say, well, it's no big deal. And then also advertising, which when you legalize it, First Amendment rights of free speech also go to corporate rights. And so once you got signs and billboards, that kids are very impressionable to that.
And that's one of the gross things I saw was some of the edibles, like different candies and things like that, with THC in them, and promoting them basically to children. I mean, we have candies and things like that. That's how it comes across to me.
Yeah, unfortunately, marijuana is now an addictive drug, and it wasn't as much 20 years ago. The THC content, which is the active ingredient in marijuana that gets you high, that's been increasing over the years. So when we look at our Woodstock weed of the 60s, that was around 1-2% THC. When we look at the average THC content today, it's around 15%. But we have a high of 32 that I've seen in the plant. But when we start talking about the extracts, those extracts are going into what they call edibles, that's upwards of 98% THC. So parents may think that it's what they were smoking in high school or college, but it's a completely different drug.
That's almost 90% more than what from the 60s, basically, if you're eating one of those edibles. That's crazy.
Right. So with that comes a whole host of health issues that we're just now starting to see.
Right.
We've probably learned more in the last 10 years about marijuana than the previous 10,000. And so that's my concern. We need to proceed with caution.
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, we have to take another break. We'll be right back with Mr. John Redman.
I really wanted to put a deck on my house.
The floor was creaking and there were cracks in the wall.
I had them put in walls in my basement.
Well, the whole thing was done on time, on budget, and not a day of work was missed.
Alpha Structural is a top-rate company. I'd recommend them to anybody.
If you live in a hillside home and gravity is pulling you towards the edge of the cliff, I recommend you call Alpha.
It was a real pleasure to work with Alpha.
There's one thing you can never have sex without.
It's not something you buy.
Or something you take.
In fact, there's only one way to get it.
It has to be given to you, freely.
It's consent.
Because sex without it isn't sex.
It's rape. Consent.
If you don't get it, you don't get it.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
Strawberries?
Okay.
And welcome back to the Red Booth Show. I'm here with Mr. John Redman, and we're discussing a very important topic. Although I think a lot of people probably, from what I've gathered and talking about this on social media, don't necessarily think marijuana is a problem. Now, when you legalize it and you make it marketable and commercialized on that level, then it starts to affect things in a much bigger way that I don't think the individual person necessarily is going to look at. So that's why you have a lot of perspective overall from your position.
Yeah, I think if we were talking about some people in Berkeley sitting around a drum circle smoking a marijuana joint, that that's up to them, in my opinion. But when we start to talk about a whole industry that will be created, like the tobacco industry, where we're going to market it, and we know how the alcohol and tobacco industry historically has preyed upon not only youth but also minority communities, then I think we have a problem.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've been down to some of the inner cities, and there's literally liquor stores like almost on every single corner.
Yeah.
So I've definitely seen that to be the case. We already have problems with high alcoholism, and but the thing that I was really interested in was looking at the effects of marijuana, because most of the time it's like, oh, people are just chilling and they just smoke a doob or whatever, right? And pretty common, honestly, in the Hollywood industry as well. I run into it all the time when I go to events and things. It's like everywhere. So what I would like to know is there's some more information about the long-term effects of marijuana. Like, you have a lot of that statistical information from your government sort of position, and I think that would be cool for people to know.
Well, in terms of the higher THC content, now we have addiction rates with marijuana where we didn't have that before. Before the mid-'80s, we didn't really have a lot of people coming in addicted to marijuana. But around the mid-'80s, I have a friend, Dr. Daryl Inaba, who was one of the founders of the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, and he said, John, before then, not much, but by the mid-'80s, I had people coming in addicted, saying it's affecting me personally, it's affecting my life, my home life, my work life, I need help getting off. When we start to see addiction, then we start to see also some disorders like anxiety and depression. And in 2012, we started to see some real problems with youth disorders.
Now, it's true that it's been reclassified as an addictive drug, right?
Yeah, the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual that the psychiatrists use, they've now put in the DSM-5 marijuana addiction disorders, because as we get to this high THC, we have addiction.
Right, because they sort of have been like evolving the plant and mutating it, right, and making it stronger and stronger.
Well, it's certainly been hybrid, crossbred,
yeah.
And through that process, you get higher potency. Right.
Now, what do you think qualifies, or what are the rules that qualify something as being addictive?
Well, there's a number of requirements within the DSM-5. Do you need more and more marijuana to get the past effect of the same high? Do you need higher potency THC to get that same high? Are you spending an exorbitant amount of time smoking marijuana than doing other things? Are you spending an exorbitant amount of time trying to find the marijuana? Are you missing out on family activities, missing Susie's wedding because you're trying to go find marijuana? Certain things are listed in terms of the criteria, and psychiatrists are starting to see that and having to deal with it.
Wow.
Yeah, we currently have about 20 million people that are smoking marijuana.
In California?
No, in the United States.
Oh, I was going to say that.
but that, if you run the numbers, then that's about 2.7 million people that reach the level of addiction, which is about the size of Chicago. So when we take a look at a small number of a really big number is still a really big number. And that's when it gets into public health issues, and puts a burden on the public health system.
No, you were talking about some of the disorders and things that were coming up with the youth that were coming up. What is that about?
Well, the biggest issue is that the brain continues to develop till around the age 25. As you introduce chemicals into that brain, including THC, then it starts to change. You have permanent brain change. And with that permanent brain change can come disorders like anxiety, depression. But what we're seeing is even certain levels of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. In a
Is
way
being
that,
caused by the use of it?
well, it's either caused by it or the person already has that potential and there's an onset because of the marijuana, an early onset from it. We don't know yet. Again, another reason why we should proceed with caution.
It makes sense though, because people do have, you know, panic attacks and stuff. Like, I mean, even back in the 90s, I've seen that happen personally, and
Right.
you know, and that was with a much lower strength of it. So,
Right.
so yeah, that's really interesting. And we need to take another quick break, and we'll be right back.
He knows he's a pretty big deal. How could you not love him?
Superheroes? Just four brothers who hate bullies and love this city. Gear up, guys.
And welcome back to the Red Booth Show. We are discussing a very important topic here with Mr. John Redman about marijuana usage in California. And also, Mr. Redman works with regards to the reduction of drug use. And
Right.
I'm sorry, it was HIDTA, right? Is the name
Right.
of the entity you're with?
Right. Yeah, so we were talking before about you know, youth use, and to me that's what it all comes down to. When we start to see introduction of marijuana and increased youth use, this is the future of our nation, and they're the next generation. And I think it's incumbent upon us as adults to ensure that these kids have every chance at a proper future. They never get a vote, they rarely have a voice. So as we take a look at things that we want for ourselves, I think we need to first ensure that our youth are protected. And that's, to me, what it all gets down to when we take a look at changing our laws and policies on drugs, as it could negatively impact our children.
That's very true. And I think that it seems as though most people start using marijuana when they're probably in their early years, in their early teens.
Yeah, the average age of onset is 12.3 years of age. And it's getting earlier and earlier as more and more marijuana is introduced into communities.
That's, yep, makes sense why I could smell it at my kid's middle school.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's not like a big, crazy drug like people think of crack or, you know, cocaine or whatever, and they think, oh, those are the terrible drugs. But I think that the effects of marijuana overall are a little bit more of an insidious problem because it sort of dumbs everybody down a little bit.
Sure.
I mean, you know, people smoke to forget things. Like, that's my opinion as to why people smoke. Really,
Sure.
it could be a problem, or they just want to have fun or whatever. We're
Right.
smoking to forget things, but it actually does make you act and behave in a more, I guess you could say, dumb way, right? I mean,
Right.
you've seen people when they're high and they're kind of acting dumb, right? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, my issue is as kids are, if kids are using and they're trying to learn, introducing that drug into their environment makes changes, especially in a key time in their lives when they are trying to learn. One of the things that came out of one of the most recent studies was, in 2012, was shocking to us, where we found that from that study that kids that were using, and not that much, before age 25 had an average IQ loss of 8 to 10 points. For people with average IQs of 100, you lose those 10 points. It kind of knocks you out of the running for going to college. And that's what I'm concerned about.
Right, like, because I'm just thinking of that like on a more widespread scale, like not on a personal scale, but if you look at it, and if usage affects your IQ by up to 10 points from that early age to 25, and you have permanent brain change, so it's like kind of irreversible brain change at that point, your IQ is lower, you have less of a chance getting into college, and then spread that out over everybody.
Right. So I think that while we're here looking at different issues, what we need to, especially the issue on marijuana and legalization, is how is it going to affect us as a whole society? I certainly don't want people locked up for smoking a joint.
Yeah.
I don't want
there's
people,
too much extreme on that side too.
Exactly, you know, and I think we need to say, look, not all of our drug policies have been effective. We have made some mistakes. I think zero tolerance in schools is a horrible policy, to kick a kid out for smoking marijuana and then saying that they can't learn in school anymore and they have to go out on the street and learn. That's ridiculous. We need to take a look at that. We certainly have a criminal justice reform issue in this country that I don't think legalizing marijuana is going to change. And as we say, well, if we legalize marijuana, we can fix the criminal justice problem. No, we can't. Not with just that. We have to talk about criminal justice reform. We have to talk about youth education and human development and all kinds of things. But unfortunately, we're debating at these extreme points of argument and really not getting down to what are the real issues and how can we really move forward and look at changing our policy without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. That, to me, is...
Meaning legalizing everywhere.
Well, yeah, I don't think that we have these two options of, you know, light them up or lock them up. What is a sound drug policy that reduces youth use, but also doesn't put a burden on the criminal justice system while not putting a burden on the public health system? It's a balance, and certainly as we move forward on policies, it's always that balance of individual rights versus community rights, or criminal justice versus public health. All of those issues, I think we really need to kind of wait and have some honest conversation about, rather than debates at extreme points.
Now, I would like to make some specific points because, for example, in Colorado, I understand that the fatalities, while people were on THC, basically went up a lot since this law has changed there.
Right. Total fatalities have gone down, except in the area of marijuana use. So people under the influence of marijuana, fatalities have gone up. As you have more use rates.
Traffic fatalities, we're talking about car accidents,
Sure.
basically.
As
Which a lot of people who smoke pot, that I mean, honestly, I know lots of different people. Some of them smoke, some of them don't. They don't think that smoking pot is that bad to drive while smoking pot. And they're more like drunk driving is a lot worse than smoking pot and driving.
Yeah, I think, well, alcohol use rates increase your chances of an accident by 3 times. Smoking marijuana doubles your chance. I think both are bad. And I certainly don't think that we should say, well, marijuana is not as bad, so let's just smoke and drive and only double our chances of a fatal car accident. That's a bizarre argument to me.
We want to lessen our chances of fatal car accidents, and especially
that would be my goal.
Yeah, and for the people who that actually personally affects, this is a much bigger deal. You know, when you find out, oh, that kid who's high just killed my child. I mean, this is a much bigger deal. It may sound like no big deal here, but it really is.
Well, we've seen this pendulum swing back and forth, whether, on a whole host of, public policy debates, whether it's, criminal justice or drug policy. And, it goes from extreme liberal to extreme conservative. And it's this blowback from one extreme to the other because, and my concern is that if we legalize marijuana in California like they did in Colorado, and we have these host of negative issues, that people will, 10 years from now say, well, this didn't work, and have some extreme draconian laws on marijuana, which to me would be the polar opposite of what we would want. So again,
like the three strikes rule.
3-strike laws, or harsher criminal justice, mandatory minimums, all of those things. come from, problems that, that people wanted changed from the past. So as we take a look at marijuana policy and we say, well, let's legalize it and have this whole industry like tobacco and alcohol industry that are industries of addiction that prey upon the weak or the young and minority communities, then I think that as we see that, then there'll be a blowback. I would rather, before we start going down this path, really have some sound, thoughtful conversations about the issues so that we can come to some logical agreement in the middle, not on the extremes.
I think that's very important, which is why I wanted to have you here today, because obviously the individual's view from a marketing recipient of all of these, like even alcohol companies, beer companies, cigarette companies, all of that sort of thing. We see it from the public perspective of all the marketing campaigns that's out there with all the big PR companies and everything.
Sure.
And these, if this does get legalized, those same marijuana companies will be having those same PR campaigns and everything like that.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I don't think people necessarily see all the things that you get to see from your government sort of angle as to how it affects the overall community. And I think that's what they really need to know in order to not have to keep the pendulum swinging back and forth and have more information.
Yeah, I think that if we take a look at alcohol, which is, the alcohol industry, that's the biggest problem, the most destructive drug that we have out there. Now, it certainly has more acceptance in our community and historically, and I understand that. But to take a look at that, which is kind of to me, a public health disaster, and to take a look at
Why
marijuana.
do you say that it's a public health disaster?
Well, because there's more problems with alcohol than any other drug, and the reason is because it's legal. When you take a look at alcohol and you take a look at tobacco, you look at law enforcement, and the majority of what they do on the weekends deals with alcohol abuse. When you take a look at tobacco, we have around 500,000 people that die every year to tobacco-related deaths. That's, in 1 year, we lose as many people as we lost soldiers in World War II, and yet we've accepted that. I think that's a public health disaster. So why would we want to take marijuana and put it into that realm of what I consider drug policy disasters?
Do you think that marijuana has a direct medical effect on a person, like where they could die from marijuana or something?
Well, you're not going to overdose from marijuana like you can from alcohol, or I think that there's some of the same carcinogens in marijuana that we see in tobacco. But to me, the issue is that every drug has their associated risks, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, or marijuana. And what we need to do is look at those risks and see if those are acceptable as we take a look at changing the laws.
And what are the risks you think there are for marijuana?
Well, if you take a look, people like to compare alcohol to marijuana and say, well, marijuana is not as harmful. Well, if you're talking about kidney disease or liver disease, then you're talking alcohol. But I think if you want to talk about health of the brain, I think you're talking about marijuana. Marijuana has much more potential for changes in the brain that we're just now finding out that some of them, like I said, we've only found out in the last few years. And as we take a look at those things, I think this rush to judgment of changing our policies on marijuana because this wasn't working in the past, and so, well, let's try this, going to the extreme of legalizing it, commercializing it, corporatizing it, where we have a whole industry preying upon minority communities and youth, I think is bizarre. When we take a look at the alcohol industry, there's 8 times the liquor outlets in minority communities than in white communities. Why? Because they don't have the $30,000 to $50,000 to give to the Betty Ford Clinic when they get addicted, and the alcohol industry knows that. So if you can addict people, the younger you can addict them, the more you have them. If you can addict underserved communities that don't have the money for treatment, that's it. And marijuana will be no different as we legalize that.
Right. And when was it reclassified as being addictive?
Under the DSM-5 that just came out last year.
Oh, so 2015?
Yeah, I mean, we've known earlier, but there was a lot of debate about it, but that debate's kind of over now. When you get to 98% THC content from 1%, that kind of changes everything in the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I heard that there was a kid that overdosed that was 5 years old in Colorado from eating edibles. Is that something you've heard about?
Well, what you're talking about is the statistic for kids going into the emergency room for under 5 they've risen by over 200%. Now, you know, what the actual numbers are, how many, I don't have that, but, you know, we're coming out with
200% on THC.
Yeah, and these are from the edibles that they have the 98% THC content. So if you
Yeah.
look at a pack of gummy bears that they don't have any THC in it compared to ones that do, that child doesn't know the difference. So when you take a gummy bear where, you know, a dosage for medical marijuana is ahead for an adult, and a kid gets a hold of that, and one of the acute symptoms of marijuana smoking or ingestion is increased heart rate. When you get 98% THC in a 5-year-old heart that's going like that, then you're going to have them going into emergency rooms to deal with them. And last year, 2 of those children went in under cardiac arrest. So there is an issue. Now, I don't want to say that every kid out there is going to go to the hospital, but what I am saying is that as we take a look at changing these laws, we need to take a look at what that means and what effect that has, because this isn't the Cheech and Chong weed of the 60s anymore. This isn't where, you know, people are just, you know, getting stoned, laughing, and going eating Cheetos. I think it was High Times magazine that said this higher THC content it's the crack of marijuana. So with that, what does that mean to us, and how will we deal with that as a community? These are the questions I think that we should have, and the discussions that we should have before we rush to policy change.
Wow. Well, I honestly could keep talking about this a lot more, because there's sort of goes deeper and deeper into many more layers. There's the whole, you know, selling of drugs and who's behind those entities, and, you know, all that statistics and everything. But I think we've covered a lot of very basic points, and I hope people really take a look and find out a lot more about the effects of legalization of this and what it would mean for us here in California. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to watch John Redman from HIDTA on
The Red Booth.